Colonel Campbell, thank you so much for joining us on Girl Take the Lead today. Um, I feel especially honored and privileged that you're here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I guess before we get into it, I would just like to sincerely thank you for your service and for writing this book because I truly feel that it's been a great way for you to give back, but also to help all the leaders coming up, that it can be a reference for them and something that they'll keep on their bookcase so that they can go to anytime they need a little words of wisdom.
Yeah, I love that. I think, I will say that retiring after 24 years in the military was pretty hard. I mean, it was all I had ever really known. And so finding a new purpose, finding a new passion, and being able to give back a little bit in the way that people have given to me and being willing to share their stories with me, I feel like this is my opportunity to do that as well.
And it definitely comes through in your book. Absolutely. And so maybe you can just give us an overview of the book and why you wrote it.
Yeah, I snuck in a little bit there already. I think, I spent 24 years in the Air Force. And, looking back, I realized that I did not survive all of that on my own, not in any way. I had a lot of people that helped me, that supported me, who were willing to share their stories, their experiences, their mistakes, their failures, all of those things that make us who we are. They were willing to share those things with me. And I realized in some very tough moments in my life, some very hard times, that I went back to those stories. I went back to those lessons learned. And so I think it's really important to share those stories. I think it's really important that we share those lessons learned, even if it's hard for us to do, because I do think it takes courage to share those hard things with others.
Yeah. Well, you start off your book talking about the mission on April 7th, 2003, in Baghdad,
Mhm.
Iraq. And I think it would be great to start our podcast with that story, just based on
Yeah.
what you were just saying.
Yeah. Probably one of the hardest times in my life, that I never expected to face. But this was 2003, so quite some time ago now. Hard to believe, almost 20 years ago. But I was an A-10 pilot. Our primary mission was to support troops on the ground to, in my words, help them get home safely to their families. And by this time in the war, Operation Iraqi Freedom, our ground troops had made it all the way to Baghdad. It was very intense. A lot of calls for close air support as our troops were taking fire. And on this day, we took off to fly up to Baghdad. And as soon as we got up there, we got this immediate call that troops on the ground were taking fire. They needed immediate assistance. We had to get in there as quickly as we could. At about that time, as I'm hearing this, I mean, like the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. My adrenaline is pumping because I know that lives are on the line. And quite honestly, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to let them down. So we listen to everything that the controller is saying. He's giving us a description of what's happening on the ground. Our troops are hunkered down, awaiting resupply on the west side of the Tigris River. The enemy is on the east side, and they're firing rocket propelled grenades into our troops. We're quickly given a target to strike that's underneath a bridge where the enemy is hiding. And unfortunately, normally we would kind of stay overhead and see this picture below us, kind of get a feel for what the battlefield is like while remaining overhead and looking from afar. But unfortunately, today the weather is terrible. We can't see the ground below. And so we're just plotting this information on our maps and preparing for the mission. My flight lead says, "All right, I'm going to find a hole in the clouds and dive through, and then it'll be your turn." And I remember just being over the target area covered in clouds and watching my flight lead just roll inverted and disappear through the weather. And there I am on my own above the weather. And I look down, find a hole in the clouds, and dive through. As soon as I pop out down below the weather, I can instantly see this firefight. There are bright flashes and tracers and smoke, and it's kind of a chaotic scene. And then at about the same time, I start to see these puffs of gray and white smoke and then bright flashes in the air right next to my cockpit. And that's when I realized not only is there this firefight happening across the river, back and forth between the enemy and the friendlies on the ground, but now the enemy is shooting it up at us too.
Mhm.
But we have a mission to do. And so, I just focus on doing my mission. I focus on the task at hand. While I know there is a threat and there is risk, I focus on what I need to do. We elect to do a couple passes. We use gun and rockets on the enemy location. And then as I'm climbing off target from my last pass is when I feel and hear a loud explosion at the back of the airplane. And I know immediately that I'm hit. The airplane is hit. It dumps over. I remember looking down and I could see Baghdad below as the ground is getting closer and I know I might have to eject. I instinctively just pull back on the control stick and nothing happens. I mean, this airplane is now plunging to the ground completely out of control. So I quickly try to analyze the situation, right? I go back to my
Mhm.
training of try to analyze the situation, figure out what's going on. I've got flashing caution lights, a caution panel over at the side that's just completely lit up. Hydraulic gauges are above that. And I see very quickly that they're at zero. The system, the hydraulic system, which is what helps us fly the airplane, is depleted. And at this point, I'm still plunging to the ground, completely out of control. I remember looking down at my ejection handles and thinking, like, that is not what I want to do. I do not want to eject and potentially float down into the hands of the enemy. And so I know I have to make every second count.
Yeah.
And I set aside my fear. I just focus on taking action and I engage a backup emergency system.
Mhm.
And thankfully, when I engage that system, the airplane slowly starts to climb out and away from Baghdad. And that's kind of the first moment where I feel like I could potentially make it out of there alive.
Yeah. Well, I know that there were so many things that were happening all at one time.
Yeah, time
Eh,
kind of slowed down.
right. And I know in the book you take us through a lot of your thinking, um, and and the aftermath of that.
Yeah.
But maybe we could just back up a second. And did it ever cross your mind, like, why did I become a pilot to begin with?
There were a lot of things that went through my mind in that moment and in the follow-on moments after that. But no, it never did. I think it was just focus on the mission, focus on taking action,
Yeah.
focus on my training, just survive.
Right.
Survive
Right.
and get out of there. And I don't know.
Well, what inspired you to become a pilot?
Kind of an interesting story because I think it's not what many people would think. I decided that I wanted to be a fighter pilot in 5th grade. This was 1986. And yes, Top Gun came out in 1986 as well. But this for me was a little bit different. This was in January of 1986. And I was watching the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger, which was really incredible and exciting and exhilarating in that first 72 seconds where everything was
Mhm.
going right. And then watching the tragedy kind of play out on TV in front of me, I don't know, there was something that I connected with in that moment, something that made me realize that those astronauts died doing something that they believed in, something that was bigger and more important than themselves. And, I realized they died doing what they believed in and that they were willing to give their lives for that. There was something for me that resonated with that I could be part of something big and important too.
Mhm.
And so I decided I wanted to be an astronaut and I was going to go to the Air Force Academy, become a fighter pilot, and then ideally go on to be an astronaut someday.
Well, I think some of our listeners might really resonate with your story about not being accepted at first at the
Yeah.
academy, and then what you did as follow up to that.
Yeah. Well, we set big goals and dreams, right? We set them. And then, like, the hard part is actually achieving those dreams. It's putting in all the work. And then, even then, when you do everything you can, it still doesn't turn out like you plan. And for me, I set at that moment in 5th grade when I decided I was going to go to the Air Force Academy, like I did everything that I thought I could do. I mean, I worked hard in school. I did a lot of extracurricular activities. I played sports. I just focused everything I had onto getting into the academy. And I would race to the mailbox every day as soon as I got home from school and was waiting for the bright blue academy logo to show up in the mailbox. And it did. But then when I ripped open the envelope, I should have known because it was small, not a large envelope. That should have been my first cue. But it was, thanks for applying, but sorry, you're not competitive, and we only have so many spots available.
Mm.
I read it as, thanks for applying, you're not good enough, because
Right.
that's what we do to ourselves, right? But it was a very competitive process, and there were, I think something like 10,000 applicants for 1,000 positions, and I didn't get in. I got a rejection letter instead. It
But
was
then
pretty devastating in the moment, for sure.
but then you got some advice, right?
Yeah, right, because I think having people around you that support you and will pick you up, kind of in those low times. I thankfully had incredible parents, still do. I had mentors and teachers and friends that were really encouraging and supporting in that moment and in that difficult time. But I also had a liaison officer who was really my connection to the Air Force Academy, who said, Kim, if this is what you want, then go after it. Don't quit. And I was like, well, what do I do? How do I let them know I still want to go, and I'm still committed. This is everything that I want. And he said, well, why don't you write the Air Force Academy letters to just, write them a letter to let them know that you're still interested. So not just one letter. I decided I would write the Air Force Academy admissions offices a letter every week to say I'm still interested. I would let them know if I got an A on a test, more push-ups, pull-ups, you name it. I would just let them know. And I said, if anybody turns their appointment down, then count me in. I'm ready. So it paid off. Eventually, I got my acceptance. I have no idea if those letters were actually the reason that I got in later, but I will take it because it was a way for me to, I don't know, stay committed to
Yeah.
my goal and stay committed to this dream of going to the academy.
Yeah, no matter what, you didn't give up.
Yeah.
Ah. So one of the most impressive things I found in your book was the way that you organized it. And you had the focus on considerations for leaders,
Yeah.
that made like your lessons right there so easy to grasp and can be such a good reference for other people and resource. And so I thought we'd go through a few of them.
Yeah.
And how about starting with be calm in the chaos? Your team is watching to see how you respond.
Yeah. You know, I am so grateful. I had some really incredible leaders throughout my time. And the one thing that they taught me, having spent multiple deployments in combat, was just how calm they could be. I mean, I don't know if they were calm inside, but they had this reassuring calmness about them that in these very chaotic, stressful situations, they could remain calm and they could help us be calm as well.
Mhm.
I think one of the situations that really stands out to me was we would occasionally get indications of incoming missiles into our camp and to where we were staying, which was really scary. I mean, the middle of the night, these alarms going off, you're trying to put on all this chemical gear for potential for incoming chemical weapons. I mean, it's just crazy and it's chaotic, and you're people are throwing things and gears going all over the place, and you have to do it very quickly. And I remember the very first alarm, we were all in the same room with our squadron, and everybody's a little bit scared because this is the first time. We don't really know what's happening. We get everything on. And then our leadership, my director of operations, he's essentially the number two, if you will, in the unit. He's got his gear on and he is just walking through and calmly patting everybody on the head, but then looking at us in the eyes to essentially say, we have a gas mask on, by the way. You can't hear anything or you can't really talk. But he's just got this reassuring look about him, this calmness in his eyes, and kind of nodding at us like, it's going to be okay. We're going to
Mm.
get through this. And that was just a reminder to me, like in the chaos, when everything's flying and everything's going crazy, can you be the leader that can walk around and just, hey, we've got this. We've put in the work. We know what we're doing. Like we're going to get through this together. I mean, that's essentially what he said by just giving us that little nod.
Yeah. I think one of the things you had in there too was that consistency creates trust.
Yeah.
I thought that was really good because so many
Yeah.
times as a leader, it's hard to be consistent.
Yeah, it's about consistency about how you treat people. It's consistency of standards and holding each other accountable. I think that is such a powerful thing to be consistent. And I get it. We don't always get it right. You know, sometimes we do get it wrong. But to try our best to be consistent, to create that trust, to build those connections, and to kind of set the standard in our words and in our behavior that what we say also matches our actions. I think that is just it's something that can set you aside as a leader to create trust.
Yeah. So, how about the next one being trust your team and empower your wingman?
Yeah. I
And
think
I
yeah,
wondered
go
how that
ahead.
April 7th decision that you had to make,
Yeah.
eject or not, and how what support you got from that.
Yeah, we talk a lot in the military, and I mean, even now outside the military, about having a wingman, right? Having somebody by your side that no matter what will be there for you, that will provide that mutual support. To me, on that April 7th mission, I saw it very clearly. I saw it firsthand what it means to have a wingman who will be by your side, who will provide that guidance and support, the mutual support, just to be there for you because in that moment for me when I was hit over Baghdad, like so many things were going wrong. And I only had enough brain bites to focus on getting my airplane under control, right? I did not have situational awareness of my surroundings. I could not see that bigger picture because I was so focused on the only thing I could do, which was try to get the airplane under control. But my wingman was there to provide the mutual support. He had my back. He was telling me as soon as I let him know that I was hit, he immediately was telling me to get west to get over the friendly location. So if I had to eject, ideally I float down over the friendlies. He was saying things like put out more chaff and flare, which is our countermeasure system, because he could see they were still shooting at us and he didn't want me to get hit again. I didn't have the awareness for that, but he did. And not only did he provide that mutual support, the whole way home, he just continued to provide me encouragement and support. And, we walked through a lot of emergency checklists. We did a lot of things, but then he would occasionally just say, "Hey, Casey, how are you doing? How are you feeling?" Just to kind of tell me that he understood how hard this was and that he was right there with me. And then probably the most important thing he said, or the most critical thing he said to me was, Kim, you're going to have to start thinking if you want to stay with the jet or jump out, meaning eject. Because I had survived that moment over Baghdad, but I still had to figure out how I was going to get home. What was I going to do with this significantly damaged airplane? And when he said that, he said, Casey, you're flying a single seat fighter and the decision is yours, and I will back you up no matter what you
Mm,
decide. That was so empowering, right? That he trusted me, he trusted my skills, he believed in me, he had confidence. It was also slightly terrifying, if I'm honest, because now the decision was mine to make, and I was worried about making the wrong choice. It was potentially the choice I made could have life or death consequences. And so it was a big decision, to say the least. But the fact that he had confidence in me also gave me that confidence in myself. I had confidence in my training, I had confidence in my preparation, and I was confident that I could land the airplane. I felt in my gut that it was the right decision, knowing that I still had an hour to fly the airplane and that I could change my mind or make a different choice if I needed to. But he truly empowered me to make that decision. He trusted me, he believed in me. That was huge.
yeah.
That was huge.
And then one of the things you talk about is when you do make it home. and you
Yeah.
do land okay, and how the other pilots reacted to you with
Yeah.
messages and can you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that?
When I think back to the actual landing, getting back was a long hour, to stay focused and to think through everything. And just, the fear that I felt, quite honestly, the fear that I felt about what could happen, and to land the airplane fairly well, I'll say, because it was probably one of the best landings I've ever done. At least it felt that way. But to land the airplane and to feel such a sense of relief and utter relief. I don't know. It was this overwhelming feeling of relief to be on the ground, but then to hear the voices from other pilots who had been watching and waiting for my return. They were standing by, some in their airplanes, some in the control tower, and everybody broke radio discipline, right? Everybody just started coming over the radio and saying things like, "Welcome home, nicely done." And I can't tell you how much that meant to me. Like, it was just such a feeling of relief, but then warmth of
Mhm.
how much these pilots cared for me, how much my brothers and sisters cared for me and were supporting me and were there for me kind of in the worst of times.
You talk a little bit about your crew chief and
Yes.
and how you were going to go over and speak with him. Do you
Yeah.
want
So our crew chief, let's just say, like, our crew chiefs essentially own those airplanes. Like, we fly them, but they own them. Like, they take care of them, they work on them, they make sure they're ready to go. And the fact that I had landed this airplane was great, but I had destroyed that airplane. Like, it was no longer serviceable. It had hundreds of holes. It had caught on fire at some point. I mean, it was severely damaged and eventually damaged beyond repair. But I felt like after I landed, I was like, "What is my crew chief gonna say?" Like, I just destroyed his airplane. What what possibly do I say to him? Uh, I had to leave the airplane on the runway. I couldn't even taxi it clear. So I got out of the airplane and then got a ride back to my parking spot where I had originally started. And my crew chief was there waiting for me. And I just remember the whole way back, I am trying to decide, what do I say to him? Like, how do I apologize for destroying his airplane? And I remember I get out of the car and I look up at my crew chief, and he just has the biggest smile on his face. Like, I don't have to say anything. I mean, he grabs my hand, he's so excited, and he says, "Ma'am, welcome home." Which was so awesome because it reminded me, like, we were a team. Like, this was a team effort, and they made sure that airplane could fly under any circumstances. We put a lot of trust in them, and they don't want to let us down.
I think I would be hugging my jet at this point and
I
kissing it,
know.
just saying thank you for getting me home.
Yeah, I'm very attached to that airplane. Um, so much so, I know not everybody has the visual, but I do have a piece of the airplane sitting over my shoulder. It's hanging on my wall. It's been with me for almost 20 years now. When they decided they couldn't fix the airplane, that they would give me a little piece of it as a memory. So
Oh.
it's a nice memory of that time, that mission, surviving a difficult situation, but also
Mhm.
the team that was there with me by my side for the whole thing.
Yeah. How about take ownership of your actions and create a culture where mistakes and failures are opportunities for improvement?
Yes.
Uh,
That's so much easier said than done sometimes, right?
well, I think you started that chapter with something about perfection. Perfection is
Yeah,
a goal, never a reality in a fighter pilot's mind.
yeah. I guess there's this idea of perfection, like, you always wanna get it right. You wanna be perfect, and the reality is it's just you wanna strive for it, but it is, I don't wanna say impossible. It is next to impossible, closely impossible to achieve, because every mission, there are going to be mistakes. There are going to be small things that happen, and even when you have, like, that really exceptional mission, there's probably a few little things you can improve on. And so one of the things that we did in the fighter community, in the flying community, was after every mission, didn't matter how long or how short that mission was, after every mission, we had a fighter pilot debrief where we would check our rank at the door, right? Check our ego at the door. So even the young members, the least experienced members, those junior members on a team can provide feedback to the more senior members in the flight. And we talked about our objectives, right? We talked about the things that we did well so that we could repeat them on the next mission. But we spent a lot of time also talking about our mistakes, owning up to our mistakes, but really drilling down into why. Why did the mistake happen? Was it a lack of knowledge? Maybe the briefing wasn't very clear. Maybe we just didn't quite understand the actions we were supposed to take. So we really continue to ask that why question and really drill down into what the root cause is. And then we pull a lesson learned. Okay, next time we're going to do this instead. What is that lesson that we learn? Need to do a little bit more studying,
Mhm.
need to brief it a little bit better, whatever it is, we figure out how we will do it different on the next mission. And then we walk out of that debrief. We're better pilots because of it. And then we share those lessons with the rest of our team, right? So that we can elevate the performance of the whole team, not just the people that were on that one mission, but everybody in the unit. And that was just the way we did business. It was hard at first, especially as a young wingman, and you're making mistakes and you're a little bit embarrassed. But what I realized is that there was such an environment of trust, of a safe space where we could provide feedback, we could admit mistakes, because the whole goal was improvement. It was
Yeah.
continuous improvement, how to do it better the next time. Um, a debrief can be a very effective tool, really, for any team or organization.
Mhm.
We use it in our family as well. And it's just one of those things that, like, no matter what you go through in life, if it didn't go as well as you wanted it to, you can do a debrief by yourself, just thinking through why didn't that go as well as I wanted it to? And what did I learn? And what am I going to do different the next time around?
Yeah.
So it's been really effective for me professionally and personally.
I think by removing the judgment, you're giving space for vulnerability and
Yeah,
courage, right? To show up.
right. Because sometimes we're so afraid of being judged, we're
Mhm.
afraid of being blamed that we may not admit those mistakes. We may not be as open about sharing things. And that is where, you know, that environment of trust comes in that allows people to be vulnerable, right? To have the courage to share those things.
Right. Lastly, maybe we can show the human side of leadership. Take the
Yeah.
time to build connections with your team.
Yeah,
Nice. Yeah.
I wasn't always really great at this. Let's put that out there first. Um, I think over time I've learned that maybe I'll start this way to say that I think initially I had this view of leadership like this expectation of who I should be. I had been in combat, I was a fighter pilot, like I had this idea of like this tough exterior, right? Like this, tough persona. And then the very first time I was in an opportunity to command a squadron, so about 150 people, military and civilian. The very first thing that we do as part of that is change of command ceremony, a formal change of command ceremony. And this is a big deal. Like it's in an aircraft hangar. There are people in the stands, there are people watching. My friends and family have flown in. I'm up on a big stage. There's an A-10, an airplane behind me, and it's a big formal event. And my husband and my son are sitting down in that front row, watching the ceremony. And after about like 15 minutes into the ceremony, I look down at my son and I can tell he's just bored, like bored out of his mind. He's 3 years old and he is bored. So I give him that little smile and he smiles back, but then he stands up. And I'm like, oh no, what are you doing? And my new boss is giving a speech about the importance of leadership, and I can barely focus on anything he's saying because, like, I'm just focused on my son because I look at him and He's taking a few more steps and moving closely towards the stage. And now I'm kind of like freaking out. Like, what is he going to do? What is my team thinking about me? My husband and I are now doing this silent communication thing where I'm looking at him thinking, you should probably do something. And he's looking at me thinking, I'm not doing anything because there could be this full blown temper tantrum right here in front of everybody. So my son doesn't care about any of this because he's just taking these slow, small steps closer and closer to the stage. And he eventually makes himself like hops up on the stage and then within seconds is sitting in my lap in this big formal ceremony. I am in my flight suit. There's an A-10 behind me, and I have a 3-year-old sitting on my lap. And there's this moment of fear of like, again, what is my team thinking? I'm supposed to lead this 150 person squadron, and I can't even control my 3-year-old son. And then I look down at him, and he's got the biggest smile on his face. And, he doesn't care about any of it. He's just content to be there in my lap. And I have this realization of, you know what? I I need to let my team see me for who I am. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a fighter pilot, I'm a leader, I'm all of these things. That is the human side of leadership, right? We can still be tough, we can be strong, but we can be compassionate and we can be kind.
Yeah.
And I, s- you know, I say that, but I was still worried like the next day, like what did my team think of that? What am I going to hear from them? And so I spent some time walking around, just getting to know people, talking to people in their different areas. And the one thing that came up in like every conversation was this concept of my son getting up on my lap. That he got up on stage in the middle of the ceremony, didn't care about anything, and it was like this moment of connection with my team that it made me human. That I wasn't just this combat fighter pilot. I was human. I had my own challenges, right? And
Mhm.
that moment connected me with my team more than anything else ever could have,
That's
just
so
because
terrific.
I showed who I was, just that real human side of leadership.
I also think you also have a story in there too about almost your humbleness about leading people perhaps that had more experience than you in certain areas. And you
Yeah.
just had the mindset of, hey, teach me what you do.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to command a group. So this was several years after this first experience, and now we're talking about 1,000 people. And like I said, I spent my almost 24 years flying airplanes. But I had a lot of people that worked for me that did other things, like engineers, lawyers, doctors. They did a lot of different things. And I decided that, you know, I didn't know what they did. I wanted to learn about it so that I could advocate for them, so that I could see their pain points and where potentially I could alleviate some of that frustration. So I just made that this goal of mine to walk around and talk to them and have them show me what they do. My firefighters that were in Honduras on one of my trips, they were like, "All right, ma'am, if you want to see what we do, then I think you should come into the burn house with us." And I was like, "Burn house? What do you mean?" Like, I'm a fighter pilot. We don't like fires. And he said, "No, ma'am, this is a controlled environment. We'll get you geared up. We'll teach you how to use the hose, but it's a burn house. And we set something on fire. We'll put it out and, we'll be with you." And there's part of me that is like, no way, like I'm not doing this. And I'll be honest, the part of it was I don't want to do something stupid. Like I don't want to do something, make a mistake in front of my team. But at the same time, I realized how important it was, one, how excited they were to show me this, but also how much I needed to just set my ego aside and do something with my team and learn from them. And I will tell you, it was probably one of the most fun, most exhilarating opportunities for me to be in that burn house, linked up with my firefighters. I mean, they had my back. They had their hand on my shoulder the whole time. They're teaching me. I mean, I have sometimes the youngest person on the team kind of walking me through how to put on the fire suit, how to handle the fire hose. Um, it just was one of those moments where you really can connect with people if you set your ego aside, you take
Yeah.
the time to learn from your team and let them teach you. They're experts in their field. So let them teach you, let them give you their ideas. It
Yeah.
was just powerful, and it was so much fun too, right? Like, from a personal perspective, I enjoyed those moments perhaps more than any others, spending time with my team like that.
Yeah. Well, I know that there are so many more things we could talk about. We could keep
Yes,
going on and
I
on
know.
and on. But I'm thinking this might be a good place to end. After all, we want everyone to go get the book so that they can hear about all the
Yes.
rest of the different lessons that you offer. But before we sign off, I'd like to just ask you one more question, which would be, what advice would you give to Gen Zers, millennials, and your own younger self about leading with courage?
Yeah. That's such a great question, and have had a lot of time to think about it. I think growing up, I was pretty hard on myself, and, I, put a lot of pressure on myself, and I wish I could go back and tell myself, like, "Don't be so hard on yourself. Don't put so much pressure on yourself." Like, you are going to make mistakes. You are going to fail at some point. What's most important is what you do in those moments, and it is okay to be worried or nervous or have fear in those moments, but you also need to take action. You also need to have the courage to get beyond the fear and take action in the face of fear. That has taken me so long today to learn and to continue to learn on a daily basis, right? It's this idea that we can be brave and afraid at the same time. Like, those are not things that are totally different. You can feel fear, you can feel nervous, you can feel anxious about something. What's most important is that you step up and do something with it, that you have the courage to take action in the face of fear.
Mm.
I wish I would have known that earlier. I wish I would have given myself a little bit more grace. I would have not been so hard on myself, and just recognize that the road is not always easy. It is going to be hard, but it is all about how you react in those moments that truly matters the most.
Mm. Well, that's beautiful and a wonderful place for us to end. So, thank you so much for joining us today. And I mean, really, I hope everyone feels as inspired as I do right now. I'm almost like teary because I'm like, oh,
Oh,
but thank you so much for joining us.
thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay. Bye, everybody.